The .22 long rifle for defense? Why? And if so, how? That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. Saddle up for another episode of Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in my life, for I could do nothing apart from Him. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, did a couple of tours in Iraq. As an assaultman after my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also did several years in law enforcement, LAPD. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. Been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. That's all I'll say about that. Been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion and West Coast Regional Rifle Champion. Won more shooting competitions with the talent that God's given me than I can actually remember. Was blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Our primary job, the reason we primarily existed, was to stop active shooters. I got the opportunity to head up and be the commander of that team. I grew up around guns, hunting and shooting, and competing at a very early age. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast, and bear and elk and all manner of things. I've even been a professional big game hunter and guide. But again, most importantly, I'm a Christian. And I am your host, Michael Milito. Welcome to Gunfighter Life. So let's talk about the .22 for defense. First of all, I think it begs the question, why? I'm going to be clear. I don't think that .22 is the best defensive caliber for rifle. Now you could debate whether .308 or .556 .223 is better, but I don't think there's any debate that both of those are better than the .22 long rifle. Also, it's pretty settled that the standard defensive cartridge in a handgun is 9mm. I am not trying to make the case that .22 is better. Now, I think there's a lot of myths around .22. It's kind of one of those things, I think, that has a lot of myth around it, and it goes in both directions. And I think before we get into some meatier parts of this, let's dispel some myths. There is an account that I've heard over and over of a couple of poachers in Africa killing an elephant with a .22 long rifle. That story might be true. That doesn't make it a good idea. There's, I think, a pretty well-documented case of a U.S. serviceman in the War on Terror killing an enemy with an MRE spoon. I don't advise you give up your EDC gun, your concealed carry gun, and start carrying an MRE spoon just because it's possible. People that are in this myth category think, oh, the .22 long rifle can kill anything on the planet. Therefore, it's just as good, effective cartridge as anything else, and I don't think that's true. I think that's a myth. Likewise, there are people that will just dispel it. Some people that'll just write off 9mm and say, oh, you gotta have 45 or 357 Magnum. 9mm is not enough. And for some people, .22 is just laughable to discuss as a defensive cartridge. I think that is also a myth and a little bit not realistic. .22 long rifle is a deadly round. It kills, and it has killed, many, many people. So the fact that it's not effective is kind of a moot point. It is very effective. It can kill. It is a deadly round. And let us not forget, I hope, if you're a concealed carrier, modern day gunfighter with morals and ethics, I've heard this phrase different ways over the years, but perhaps my favorite way is, hopefully you're there to change somebody's behavior. They're doing something evil that requires your martial intervention of an individual to change their behavior. They're doing something so egregious, so evil, you have to change their behavior. And that is the goal. Whether they die or not to you should pretty much be inconsequential for a concealed carry or defensive use of force encounter for the majority of people. So deadly is kind of irrelevant there. Does it stop people? Does it stop them from doing what they're doing? And I would submit yes, that it does. So and I could go into all kinds of myths about the 22, but I think if we're going to be realistic and sober about this topic, let's look at it soberly and circumspectly and consider what the 22 long rifle can actually do and what it can't do. I think we should concede it's not as powerful, obviously that's just math, as 223, 308, 9mm. However, it is certainly an effective round at changing people's behavior. So let's concede that. Let us start from that point, hopefully. And I am not telling you to abandon any of those other calibers and start carrying 22. However, there are people that choose to carry 22, that choose to have their go-to defensive long gun as a 22 for survival, for putting meat on the table, for defense. That is a real thing. So I'm here to help. I'm here to serve. I am blessed and humbled to be able to serve you. How can I serve that part of the community and inform others listening? You may find yourself in a situation where that's what you have. So let's talk about what I think are some reasons people carry the 22 and why they choose to carry the 22 and how they're not as laughable as some may say they are. Number one is cost. I just recorded an episode on budget battery, like building and getting into shooting and firearms on a budget. That's a real thing. I grew up poor. I'm very familiar with that. Maybe their first gun, the one that they have, the one they've decided is their first gun, is going to be a Ruger 10/22. I'd say it's not a bad choice. They're going to buy some bricks of 22 ammo and start training and learning gun safety and the fundamentals. And while they have that gun, and that's the disposable income that they have, that is their best defensive option because they don't own anything else. They don't own a whatever you think the best defensive handgun should be. They don't own an H&K Mark 23 or a 357 Magnum, medium frame revolver. They just don't have that. They don't have a Daniel Defense AR-15, and they're probably not going to get one in the next couple of days. So for the person that has that one gun, and that one gun is a Ruger 10/22, let's say they're, homesteading and they want to be able to have a gun and they're just getting into guns and they have a bunch of other stuff, animal feed and feeding kids and all other expenses. And for now, that's the gun that they have to dispatch chickens and take care of coyotes in the hen house. Whatever the case is, that's the gun that they have. And if they need to use something for defense, that's probably their best option. And I don't think that's a foolish thing to talk about. Not everybody can just go out and, buy a Daniel Defense M4. Nor do I think that's maybe the best place to start anyway. And some people, a lot of people I think, will start with the 22. Let's talk about another situation. We've all lived through times of civil unrest. Maybe not in your city, hopefully not in your city, but I've certainly been in cities with civil unrest. There's been cases of that. Maybe you live in a city or a suburb or whatever. It's not unreasonable to think, I hope you will agree, living through the past couple of years, that it's possible. In which case, maybe you listening to this are the alpha male of that household, the breadwinner, the whatever it is, the primary defender of that house. But it may get to a point where you want other people armed. A wife, children that are old enough and mature enough to handle a gun. I've been going out and putting the food on the table with a firearm and a 10/22 I've been out in the woods with since I was young. Maybe you want to arm other members of the family to be a force multiplier. You don't want it to come to that, but maybe you have your Daniel Defense AR. I'm not picking on Daniel Defense to make a fine AR, that's why I'm using them. But maybe it's a chore for you to get your wife and kids out to the range. You're just not into it. And, a 10/22, or a Marlin Model 60, whatever, is what they're going to shoot. Your wife just is not interested in shooting an AR. It's too big. It's too loud. I'd rather have them armed with something that they enjoy shooting and are familiar with shooting and can actually hit something with. So maybe arming the rest of your family, or the ones that are old enough and mature enough. Probably if you're standing up against looters or rioters, if you get stuck, you can't get out, whatever the case may be, having other members of your family or friends having your back. I'd much rather have them armed with a Ruger 10/22 than a pointy stick or a pitchfork. I think that's something worth mentioning. Also, on the 22 handguns, maybe for some people with physical disabilities or other reasons, environment, permissiveness, they can only carry a really small gun, and they've decided that the recoil of a small .380 is too much for them. Or they even carry a full-size gun, but they've decided for them and their physical abilities and their ability to shoot that a 22 is their best option. And I'm not going to tell them it's not. If you've got somebody, that's got some pretty severe limitations, and I've been blessed to train a lot of people from military, law enforcement to, very young and elderly. Not everybody is going to rock a Glock 19. I know some people think like the Glock 19 is the answer for everybody, but it's not. And there's just a certain amount of the population where that's not a good choice for them. Maybe a 22 is what they can handle and shoot effectively. And, the goal of shooting is hitting an object, hitting a target. I'd rather have them with a gun they can hit than a 9mm or a .45 they're going to miss with. And I don't think that's the majority, but I think there is a certain subset of the population that are in that camp. Also, let's talk about the peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan, maybe more so than just localized looting or rioting. It is the, end of the world as we know it. Like, it's not the end of the world, but it's the end of the world as we know it. Things are far different. And this is not me, this is not my go-to first choice. I do have a bug out 22 option in case I want to go to it, but it's not my first or even my second choice. But for a lot of survivalists, preppers, and I don't shy away from those terms, let's not let Orwellian newspeak, get in the way of things. I like to survive. I like breathing air and eating food, and I hope to continue to do so by God's grace as long as He allows. I don't apologize for that. So if it's time to go survivaling, a lot of people will say that the 22 is the best option. Ammo is affordable, and you can carry a lot of it. You can, even in a pair of cargo pants. I could put a belt on and an old pair of BDU pants with cargo pockets and carry 1,000 rounds of ammo in my pockets. Now, that's not the best way. That's not how I would choose to carry it. But it proves a point that I could throw on a pair of boots, a tank top, and a pair of BDU pants and carry 1,000 rounds of ammo. And for not a lot of money. There's really no other option like that. You start even stepping up to 22 mag, it's quite a bit more expensive and it takes up more room. The 22 is great in that. You could have a very small pack and, a Ruger 10/22 takedown and carry 1,000 rounds of ammo. And then in that situation also, already carrying the 22 ammo and a 22 rifle, it might make sense to have a 22 caliber sidearm. For when you're in a non-permissive environment, you take that 10/22 takedown apart, keep it in your pack, and have your 22 handgun concealed on your person. I mean, there are, I think, situations where somebody may choose to carry 22 for defense. All right. If we can see that some people do and will carry a 22 for defense, how can I help you? How can I serve you today? Let me talk about something that's true for all guns, but really some more than others, and I think mostly true for the 22 long rifle. The gun and the ammo are kind of a couple, if you want to think about it in a Romeo and Juliet type terms. And you need that firearm and ammo to get along, right? You don't want either one in an abusive relationship. You want a good, symbiotic, mutually beneficial, smooth relationship. And 22s are bad about this, finicky. And it's not really particular to any one gun or model. Ruger 10/22s are really good and reliable. CCI mini mags are really, really good ammo. But you may have a Ruger 10/22 that doesn't like CCI mini mags. That'd probably be my place to start, but for whatever reason, it may like CCI Stingers better. It may like Aguila Super Extra better. And this is really true. It's true with a lot of guns. Like, you could get a 9mm that doesn't like certain kinds of ammo, bullet profiles, whatever. But it's really true with the 22, and they're pretty individualistic, just like a relationship. So you have to kind of find what your 22 likes. You could just get a 22 that's really unreliable and doesn't like anything. But in most cases, most good proven 22 platforms are going to prefer one kind of ammunition to another in reliability. Hopefully it gives you a couple of choices. Once it's reliable, how accurate is it, and then terminal performance. But really do your research. That's one of the great things about the 22. Ammunition is fairly affordable. So maybe you want to put a couple of hundred rounds through of the ammo you plan on using for defense through that gun, to get familiar with the gun, to get good with the fundamentals, and to make sure it's a good relationship on both ends. That gun and ammo get along well together, that they're a good match. Think of it like playing matchmaker tactically. And I think that's especially true with the 22, both handguns and rifles. Now let's talk about ammo selection. I talked about reliability. Obviously, the gun needs to go off. You need to hit your target, so accuracy. But also terminal performance. Again, 22 long rifle is not a 223. It's not even a 9mm. So I think getting the most advantage out of terminal performance for what you want is important. You may even forgo a little bit of accuracy. Let's say your gun shoots 2 brands or models of ammo styles equally reliably for all intents and purposes, and one shoots an inch at 50 yards and one shoots an inch and a half at 50 yards. 50% worse accuracy, but it has far better terminal performance. You may want to choose that one that shoots an inch and a half at 50 yards. Accuracy, I think today people accuracy at the cost of everything else. How cheap can we make a bolt-action rifle with a plastic stock that shoots sub-MOA? Forget about a bunch of other features. Feeding and handling and coatings and all this stuff. How accurate is it? People will buy it if it's accurate. And again, terminal performance is important. You may forego a little bit of accuracy for good terminal performance. For instance, like Ely 40 grain lead is kind of a go-to accurate load. One, it's expensive. Two, it is not really made for terminal performance. You may decide that straight lead is not what you want because it can let up a barrel. You may decide you want a copper plating. You may decide you want better terminal performance, even though it's not as accurate as that Ely or some other kind of really good match ammo. Now let's talk about terminal performance. There's a lot of different kinds of 22 ammo and specialty stuff. I'm going to stick with hollow points and round nose. Those are your two big ones. Not all hollow points or round noses are created equal, but I have shot I don't know how much small game with 22 long rifle. I can absolutely say that out of a rifle, 22 long rifle is more devastating with hollow points if it expands. That being said, you lose a lot of velocity going to handguns. That's one of the great things, again, about the 22. You can probably afford to shoot it and train with it. You should shoot and train with the 22 rounds you plan on carrying, especially in a handgun, to see whether or not they will expand. That's on you. You may also decide that expansion is not what you want. 22 is not a very powerful cartridge. You may decide you just want penetration. And you may decide that, I'm not saying they won't, but let's say you have a very short-barreled handgun and you're shooting CCI Mini-Mag hollow points. Your gun likes them. It shoots them point of aim, point of impact. They're accurate. They're reliable, but they don't expand. You may decide that's just fine for you in your handgun. You don't want them to expand. You want a lot of penetration. You may decide you do want expansion, and you can find a couple of loads and one hollow point doesn't expand, but the other one does. And maybe that's your load. Again, that's a great thing about the 22. You should be able to go out and just, one, have fun. 22s are a lot of fun to shoot. Be able to train and be able to test your gun and your ammo combinations. Normally, I would say, like for a 9mm, in general, for a defensive load, you want good expanding hollow point ammunition. However, I would not make that statement carte blanche with 22 long rifle, either in a carbine or a handgun. You may decide you want solid ammo. You may decide you want a truncated cone, which are really good and generally do more tissue disruption and tend to penetrate deeper and straighter than a round nose. You may decide you want a hollow point. You know, that's on you. I don't think it's as cut and dry as it is like 9mm. You may decide you want less tissue damage. We talked about the survival thing in small game. You know, I've shot a lot of small game with 22 hollow points, and they can actually be quite devastating on the body of a small thing. You may decide you don't want that if you want to eat it. You may just want a regular round nose, you know, typical 40 grain copper wash bullet because it does less tissue damage. And unless you're taking out varmints like prairie dogs or whatever, you know, if you're shooting something to eat it, less tissue damage is generally better, so long as you can still put that animal down and recover it. Alright, so now I'm going to get into what may be the controversial part of the episode, even more so than carrying 22 for defense. Training philosophy. I'm going to harken back to, if somebody is doing something evil that's going to cost somebody else their life, then you want to change their behavior. You want to change their behavior. I am not a murderer. I am not an executioner. I am a gunfighter. If you listen to the Bible, you'll know as a commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters. Notice, to stop active shooters. Whether or not they die is really inconsequential to me as long as I can stop loss of life. It should kind of be the same philosophy for us, I think, for defensive gun use. Is 22 as effective as 9mm? No, I don't think that it is. If I did, then I would probably be carrying a 22 on my hip. I'm carrying a 9mm. Although I don't think the disparity of force is as great as some would have you believe. 22 is absolutely deadly. I don't really see the need for differences in training with a 22 versus any other caliber. Other than, I would say, really practice your malfunction drills, your failures to fire, and your double feeds, because the ammunition in general is just less reliable. You should be practicing those anyway. I would say training philosophy, shoot to stop the threat. Shoot to change their behavior. There was a case not that long ago where a police officer, I think with a Glock 21, went through all his magazines and many hits on a suspect, and he still didn't stop. Until the last round, I think he put in his head. You'll be able to find that case if you really want to dive into it. So I don't think the disparity is as great. Certainly could need 5 or 6 or 10 rounds of 22. You could need 1, you could need 0. You could draw your gun out and he could put his hands up and say, whoa, this is more party than I was prepared for. In which case, that's a victory, right? A win-win. That guy changed his behavior and you didn't have to kill anybody. There are times and places for different drills. You know, if somebody is running at you with a knife, I have been trained 4 rounds center mass as fast as you can. If they're running at you full bore, full tilt with a knife, if they're close enough to be a threat with a knife, they're probably going to make it to you even if you get rounds in them. Now you still want to, hopefully use other tactics, getting off the X and whatever, but if they're running straight at you with a knife, even if you shot them right through the heart, they're still probably coming at you because they're already running full bore. And despite what the movies say, even if you shot them with like a 45, they're not going to fly backwards. That's not how that works. So I think there is a time for that. And I would harken back to a standard drill is the Mozambique drill, 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. That's a good drill for 22 as well. Why is that? Even if you think 9mm is the greatest thing since sliced bread, a lot of times handgun shots, even center mass, are not effective. So you move to the head. I would say that's a good thing no matter what caliber, whether it's a 45 or a 9mm or a 22. So I really don't see any big difference in philosophy in 22 over a centerfire handgun caliber. Those are my thoughts. You may disagree. You train or get training the way you choose to. Now, transitioning from that, what I think are some top picks for defensive weapons chambered in .22 long rifle. I don't think this is going to surprise anybody. For long guns, really, the Ruger 1022 or one of its higher end clones. But really, there's really no reason, if you're talking about a rifle, a long gun, I don't think, to go with anything other than a Ruger 1022. They are a good, proven design. They are very modular. You know, you can do all kinds of upgrades to them, or you can just get them at Walmart and run them out of the box, and they're a good option. They're semi-automatic. They're about as reliable as any semi-automatic 22 probably can be, because the weak link there is generally the ammo. I mean, all guns can break and malfunction, but Ruger 1022 really has that. If you want a good, like, dual-use survival gun as well, again, it's not my first choice or my second choice, but my go-to survival 22 would be Ruger 1022 Takedown. So that's what I'm going to recommend for you. It's a good option. You know, you don't have to take it down. You could just use it like a regular 1022, but if you wanted to take it down and put it in a pack or under a seat, or go clandestine through a city to get out or whatever, and you don't want everybody to know that you have a gun, there's a lot of utility there. So, you know, the Ruger 1022 Takedown. You can mod it out if you want, put a better trigger in it, put better sights on it. You can just run it the way that it is. That's one of the great things about 22s a lot, as opposed to centerfire rifles, which a lot of times nowadays don't come with iron sights. The Ruger 1022 still does, and they're good iron sights. They're not the best. I prefer a peep sight. That's what's on mine. I really like the tech sight, peep sights, but the 22 sights that come on are perfectly serviceable. The 1022 Takedown, that's probably the easiest recommendation. Now, handguns, going to be a little bit harder. My number one choice, again, is going to be my go-to 22 handgun, and that's a Ruger Mark IV. Now, all the Mark series are pretty similar. If you already have one, you know, it is what it is, but really the Mark IV, they really did a giant upgrade in there. If you have ever cleaned and disassembled the Mark 1, 2, or 3, you are probably familiar with frustration. The Mark IV is quite a bit easier to take down and maintain, and I think that's important. Maybe less important if it's just a range gun for fun and getting familiar, because if it has a bunch of malfunctions, no big deal. But the Mark IV, for cleaning and ease of maintenance, really is a giant step forward. They are really good. They're crazy accurate because they have a fixed barrel, fixed sights. They're a great option. As far as 22 handguns go, they're very reliable. So that would be my number one choice. Not the exact model that I have the tactical, which is a bit heavy, but I like it because I use it as a training aid to full-size handguns. But if that's not the case, you may really look at the lightweight 2245s or 22 Mark IVs. The 2245 is just a little bit different in that it has a similar grip angle to a 1911, which I prefer, may not matter to you. But that's going to be my number one recommendation. There is a real big case in the 22 for going with a revolver. Why? Because I mentioned the weak link for reliability generally is rimfire ammo. Rimfire ammo is generally, in the vast majority of cases, not as reliable as centerfire. Therefore, 22 revolvers make a lot of sense. If you have a misfire, then you can just pull the trigger again and put a fresh round in front of that hammer firing pin. So that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense if it's for defense, for a double action. The Smith & Wesson 617 would kind of be my number one recommendation. Also, they make the, if you want a small compact option or a lighter option, they do make the Ruger LCRs of varying designs in 22 long rifle. I think it's a fantastic choice. I should point out that revolvers also have the added benefit of should be able to fire 22 longs and 22 shorts. Times of ammo shortages is what you can get. You know, there's a lot of benefit there. So those are going to be my top recommendations. If you have a favorite that's not that, it's fine as long as you prove that it's reliable and works well. Also, I touched on the shorts and longs. Shorts are still fairly loud out of a revolver or a handgun. However, going back to the Ruger 1022, if you chose to go with a bolt action, which I wouldn't for defense, because this is a defensive 22 episode, but if you did, you're giving up rate of fire, but it does generally give you the ability, whether it's a bolt action or a lever action, a manually operated, manual transmission firearm. You should be able to run shorts or even CB caps. Why might you want to do that? Because they're really quiet. And then being really quiet could be advantageous in certain environments. So you may consider that a lever action or a bolt action rifle. But in general, for defense, really the Ruger 1022. Now let's talk about ammo. And I talked about the relationship of gun and ammo. And you really need to test these. Don't say, oh, the host of Gunfighter Life said CCI mini mags are great, so I'm going to load those up in my Glock 44 and it's going to be fine. Don't be a beta tester in a defensive gun use encounter. Test it. So with that caveat, recommendations for 22 ammo. For whatever gun it is, I would say start with CCI mini mags. There's generally two flavors. There is the 36 grain hollow point, and there is the 40 grain round nose. Again, that really depends on you and what you're trying to do. But that's a good place to start. They're not dirt cheap, but we're talking about defensive 22. We're not talking about prairie dog hunting or things like that. If it's a defensive 22, really I think a couple of more pennies on the round is well worth the investment. So I'm going to advise you go with the 22 mini mags, at least for a starting point. They're generally reliable and work through a lot of 22s. Again, maybe not yours. Also, if you're talking about bulk ammo, going back to that survival situation for your 1022, the Federal Champion, historically they came in like a maroon and blue box of 550 rounds. They may have changed packaging, stuff like that, but the Federal Champion, I do believe they are also a 36 grain hollow point. They're pretty good, they're pretty accurate, and they're quite affordable. You may take a good look at those. Also, the next two, especially for handguns. If you have a finicky 22 handgun, and some of them can be, especially when they get a little bit dirty. Now, if it's a defensive handgun, I suggest you keep it clean. But the Aguila Super Extra, it's really, really good ammo. It's quite hot, which can really aid you in 22 handguns. In general, in my experience, especially if it's a 22 handgun with a reciprocating slide, the hotter ammo tends to be more reliable, in my experience. So you may decide to go with Aguila Super Extra. It's pretty good, it's pretty hot. Also, Winchester Super X makes some pretty decent and hot ammo. Now, there's a myriad of 22 long rifle ammo, and you may have something you prefer, but if you're looking for a suggestion to start out and try, and you may decide that ammo is not good for that gun or not good for your situation, but I thought it would be useful to give some suggestions on that. Alright, now let's talk about 22 Magnum. I'm not really sure that this belongs in this episode, but I don't know that I'm going to do an entirely different episode on 22 Magnum for defense. If you guys want that, let me know. If you look at 22 long rifle for defense, I'd say it's a very small subset. It's a very niche group of concealed carriers. So the 22 Magnum is going to be even farther removed from that. If you look at the total rounds sold of 22 long rifle versus 22 Magnum, I would say it's a small fraction. So that being said, I don't know I'll do an entire episode on it, so I feel I should cover it a little bit here. Some would say, well, if 22 is okay for defense and 22 long rifle is less powerful than 22 Magnum, 22 Magnum must be better. It's more powerful. But I would say, first of all, there's a couple of issues with 22 Magnum that I think we should address. It is a very bombastic round, especially out of a handgun. Out of a rifle, the difference in noise is maybe academic, but out of a handgun, it can be quite loud, quite boisterous in a pistol length barrel. So a lot of people, it's not so much, it depends. Some people, it's the actual inertial force of recoil that bothers them, and some it's the noise. And 22 Magnum is loud. It's very loud out of a handgun. So if the whole reason you're going to this is recoil. Again, that noise and concussion can have a lot to do with psychological effects of the shooter shooting the round. So I would say that is an issue. Also, 22 Magnum is not known for being super reliable in semi-autos. There is only really one mainstream, readily available 22 semi-auto handgun that I'm aware of, and that's the Kel-Tec PMR 30. And I don't know that it's known for reliability. Likewise, the 22 Magnum in a rifle. The 1022 is legendary. They made the 1022 and 22 Magnum for a while and then stopped. It has some inherent issues, and that's a long, skinny cartridge. And it's at pretty high pressures. It can have some reliability issues. There are semi-automatic 22 Magnum rifles, but none, I would say, rise to the level of dependability and availability and aftermarket support of the Ruger 1022. A lot of times, if you're going to 22 Magnum in a long gun, you're going lever action or bolt action, and both of which are great, and they have their purposes. But if you offered me for defensive use, a Ruger 1022 semi-automatic box magazine fed, or probably the next fastest manual transmission, the lever action 22 Magnum for defense, I would certainly take the 1022 with semi-automatic capability and box magazines. So there's an issue there. Big benefits are it has a high power to weight ratio. It has, I think, much higher power to weight ratio than the 22 long rifle. It has quite a bit more power. It's not a marginal step up in power. It's quite a big step up in power over 22 long rifle. And it doesn't weigh a lot more. So going back to that bug out survival scenario, it might be an even better choice for that if money is not an object and the ability to train with high volumes of ammo is not an object, because it costs quite a bit more than 22 long rifle. But on a pure power to weight ratio, it's perhaps only rivaled by the 5.7 by 28. It doesn't weigh a lot more, and it gives you quite a bit more power. And in a long gun, that equals range, effectiveness, hunting capability. So there is that. And I would say in a handgun, it makes the most sense in a revolver, because you don't deal with those issues. There are quite a few revolvers chambered in 22 Magnum. It does fine in that. In fact, unlike a lot of other guns, sometimes in a revolver, you can get revolvers that will have interchangeable cylinders that you can fire 22 Magnum and 22 long rifle. But I think if you're talking defense in a handgun, it really makes the most sense in a revolver if you decide you want to go that route. Just be advised it is going to be pretty loud and have quite a bit of concussion and barrel lengths that are common to defensive handguns. It is a great round. It is a great round for, I would say that medium kind of small game. Raccoons, coyotes, possums, foxes, anything like that. I would say it's quite a bit of a better round than 22 long rifle. Not that 22 long rifle won't do all those things. So, again, those are kind of my thoughts in a nutshell on the 22 Magnum. It's a great round. I don't know that I would choose it personally for a defensive round over 22 long rifle, and I don't generally choose 22 long rifle as a defensive round. But those are my thoughts on it. It's got a great power to weight ratio. It's quite a big step up in power from the 22 long rifle. It's also quite a bit more expensive, and it can have a little bit more feeding issues, and it operates at a higher pressure. So those are my thoughts. Hopefully it was helpful. Alright, before I start rolling into the tactical tip of the day, if you thought this information was useful and helpful and you want to support the message for the fraction of the cost of a brick of ammo, $5, that's the default. You can sign up for $1 if you want to become a patron. Patrons do get a lot of cool insider content. If they choose to, they can be part of a cool insider chat where we help each other out. It's not just me giving advice, it's all of us helping each other, which is a fantastic resource that I'm humbled to be a part of. Also, I post, Patreon-only things on Patreon. Go check it out. There's a link in the show notes. You don't even have to sign up. Just check it out. Most of that stuff is just for patrons, but some of it is open to the public, so you can get a rough idea of the things that are on there. Again, consider becoming a patron. Link in the show notes. With that, the tactical tip of the day. Clay targets. I often refer to them as sporting clays, and that I think drives one of the patrons crazy. So clay round disc targets, usually orange. Buy them at Walmart, a lot of other places. Most people think of those as being thrown in the air to be shot with a shotgun, and absolutely you can do that with them. They're also great training for the 22. If you think you want to get into the world of hunting, or you just want a more fun practice session, you got that, Ruger 10/22 or something like it. Go out with a buddy and take turns, or do it by yourself if you have to, but set up a woods walk or a desert walk. You're walking through like a wadi or a ditch or wherever your environment is. And set up these targets in such a way that some you shoot from 100 yards or 75 yards or 25 yards or 5 yards, because you go around a corner and bam, there's the target. And maybe you want to spray paint them different colors, and you can get pretty creative with this. Like, spray paint some blue, and the blue ones you have to shoot from kneeling, and the white ones you have to shoot from prone. The orange ones you can shoot however you want. Things like that. Not exactly hunting, because they're not going to be moving or seeing you, smelling you, but it's a lot more realistic than shooting off a bench at a square range. So if you can, that's a cheap and easy way to do that. And if you decide you want to start getting into hunting, that might be a pretty good way to get some practice in. Also a lot of fun. So if you have a new shooter, you're trying to get into shooting, once they've done the basics and been on the square range, there's a time and a place for that, and demonstrated good safety practices and an understanding of the fundamentals, something like that can be a lot of fun. A lot more fun than just standing and shooting at a square range at the same paper target or whatever. So that's your tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. It's been a while since I've done this one, so I'm going to do it again. Psalm 144. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. With that, men, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.